it is time for another Ignite speaker, and that is Casey Schulberg, who is right here with his lovely pup, Heavenly. And Casey is the film director for the film that we're about to watch. He's an entrepreneur and climate change activist with a 30-year career in film and television, and has produced and directed 4 documentaries on water quality and climate change, spent 5 years with the International Waterkeeper Alliance, working with the climate change cohort and covering UN climate conferences. So really steeped in this subject matter. And currently partnering with the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma to develop a sustainable resort. So that's just, a couple things Casey's up to, not a busy man at all. We're so proud to have him here and to join us and to kick off the screening with an Ignite talk. So y'all give it up for Casey.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you, and we're filming this, and there's some people tuning in from points around the globe. So my first time in Montana, quite a revelation, so really happy to be here. Bex, thank you to Anderson for putting this together and inviting us. So as Bex said, I'm an entrepreneur and a climate change activist or environmental activist and filmmaker. And we put together a little doc that you'll see here, and then I have a really celebrated panel that's going to come, and we'll talk for half an hour when the movie's done. So why are we in this pickle? Let me just see here. In 2015, the Paris Climate Accord basically asked us to limit, or tried to set out a directive to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above in pre-industrial levels by the year 2050. And by many accounts, we've attained that now. Last year, as you can see by these headlines, a lot of people think that we're already hitting that 1.5 degree marker. It depends where you are in the country or in the world. The poles are warming faster than some other parts. That's creating a whole host of problems in itself because we're melting a lot of ice. And you have all these kind of cyclical behaviors, like you melt ice, this reveals more permafrost, that reflects less sun, so it gets hotter, and all these kind of cycles that are just not helpful. But you can see by what we're currently going through, and there was some talk that I had a hand in creating the event in Florida yesterday. I don't have that kind of power. But it is kind of remarkable that Florida has become a poster child in a lot of ways for climate change, what with flooding, extreme precipitation, hurricanes, sea level rise. And I lived in Florida for 10 years. That's when I made this documentary about a year ago on the impacts of climate change on Southwest Florida that you're going to see in a minute. So we're basically in a pickle here, folks, because we're basically at 1.5 degrees now, and they were trying to hold that, get it curved down below that, and it looks like we've attained that, and we may blow through that. So that would be we'll see a host of implications and horrific events that'll be compounded if we blow through the 1.5 degrees. So. By all accounts, the hottest year on record was last year, 2023. And you can see that actually 2023 was excessively higher than the prior year. So it was far and away the hottest year on record. So we're heading toward something which is really undesirable. And how do we deal with this? How do we bend the curve? That's the question. And we'll try to get into that with our panelists after the movie. So part of the problem is when we have this warming of the universe, warming of the planet, 90% of that warming goes into the ocean. So you can see the very tiny sliver of yellow is the land. In other words, land absorbs heat, but not to the rate that water does. So look at all that blue stuff. That's the water. That's all heating oceans. So it's very hard to cool down the oceans when they've been heated. So that, Harold Wanless, Director Emeritus of the University of Miami School of Geology says basically you can't stop. Even if we stopped everything now, we would still see a progression toward more warming because a lot of this is just in motion. You can't, it's like a friend of mine said, you drop a ball, and even if you stop dropping the ball, that ball is already in motion, it's gonna hit the floor. So a lot of this stuff is baked in, and we're gonna see the implications grow and continue to grow for 30 to 40 years, and that is dependent on whether we can actually bend this curve and start to get this thing under control, which is not a done deal. It's definitely an open question. So, the impacts of having all that warm water are manifold. Basically, what evaporates when we have warm water? Water goes into the atmosphere and it accumulates, and then we have extreme precipitation. So that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing it also. Warm water creates an environment that is positive for extreme hurricanes to gather steam. So we saw the one yesterday go from a tropical storm to Cat 4 within 8 to 10 hours. That's because the water in the Gulf of Mexico is around 80 degrees. It should be around 60 at this time of year. It's around 80. We clocked temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico at 95 degrees last summer. So that's really propitious for huge and voluminous storms, and then all that is just going to dump tons of water on our land, and that's part of the reason why we see what we saw yesterday. So it's kind of why what we're talking about is important and timely, because Florida just went through another horrific event yesterday, and we have somebody chiming in after the movie from Southwest Florida. They're going to call in from Fort Myers. That's Mike Savarese that you'll see in this movie, who's a climate change scientist. And he's actually going to be able to call in, even though they got devastated yesterday, and talk about what's going on locally. So that's where we are. Really thank you for inviting us. We'll cue the movie now, and we'll come back to you in a few. Bex will introduce these panelists, and we'll get back into it. Thank you very much.
Oh, that's a no-brainer. You just have to go outside and see it for yourself. No matter where you are in America, you're either in a drought, a flood, a tornado, a hurricane, something is happening.
You believe there's no such thing as global warming. I dare you to just live in the Bahamas, especially on the island of Grand Bahama, for the next 10 years. And you be the judge of that. We've experienced it. We've seen where our beaches have eroded. We've seen where our water lenses have been impacted. We've seen where our coral reefs have died off. And that's because we're living it. So we expect for any naysayers to really visit us and see for yourself what's happening to these islands. We're losing these islands, we're losing lives. Global warming is definitely real.
my work with climate change has to do with helping the public understand this very complex issue and their role in it. We are really challenged by this in Southwest Florida. And part of it is the scale of the problem, right? It's an invisible problem to many people. It happens on a very long time scale. It happens on very large spatial scales, and that's just hard for people to understand.
There's been widespread consensus among over 97% of scientists from all disciplines that climate change is caused by humans and exacerbated by humans, and our inability to make any changes or take action is further exacerbating the issue of climate change.
I think the state of panic on the issue of climate change is an 11 out of 10. I think we should have been doing things 50 years ago. It's really hard to read about or watch anything that is explaining that there were scientists sounding alarms 50 plus years ago. It's really disheartening to learn about that and know about that.
We're not just looking at one study. We're not just looking at carbon in the atmosphere, or we're not just looking at how much sea level has risen on average. We're looking at the impacts on soil. We're looking at the impacts on one flower or plant species in the Sierra Nevada mountains, marching up that mountain. And we're thinking, well, why is it doing that? Well, it's because climate is changing. So most of what I do is try to find ways to communicate that urgency, to communicate the scale of the problem, and that yes, they can make an impact. They can work towards positive change, and that it will matter.
The good news is that the nation and the world has been moving more toward that position, I think, particularly in recent years, and there have been encouraging signs. I think in Florida, the progress toward recognizing that has been less, but it's still improved significantly, particularly at the local level in recent years.
I'm standing here in a hollowed out business located on Fort Myers Beach, a business and an entire community that was devastated by Hurricane Ian in late September. And it serves as a great exemplar in a horrific way of how climate change can influence the intensity and impact of tropical storms and hurricanes. Hurricane Ian came to shore, bringing with it hurricane force winds, Category 4 winds, but it was less of a wind damaging event and more of a storm surge damaging event. And storm surge is one of those consequences of climate change, where storms persist with winds blowing more and more water on shore. That water comes on shore and just overtakes and overwhelms a community, and that's what happened here. Fort Myers Beach is a barrier island. This barrier island was overwashed and inundated with over 10 feet, maybe 12 feet of storm surge. The water literally ripped through this building and caused the destruction that you see here.
Why are we having climate change? We're having it because we've had centuries of development where the production of energy was from carbon sources, coal, oil, and gas. It allowed us to build a wonderful economy that we all benefit from. But that release of carbon into the atmosphere has accelerated the impacts that we are now experiencing from the heating of the atmosphere, the warming of the oceans, and a host of other impacts.
When we talk about warming, we talk about changing evaporation rates, changing precipitation rates. The ocean is warming and it's also causing the ocean to expand. So we are also dealing with sea level rise. So all of that impact the way we manage water in South Florida. So yes, climate change is central to the work that we do in this agency.
Much of what we experience on the day-to-day regarding climate change, we don't connect our actions to their impact very well. We drive around in cars, we fly around in planes. All of those things are part of our daily lives, and people really feel like their hands are tied in a lot of ways and that they can't affect change because, frankly, our world is now built with fossil fuels in mind. They relieve themselves of the responsibility in a way, because what can I do in a world that's built for fossil fuel? So really what I try to do is work with everyone from kindergartners all the way to our retirees and our seasonal folks that are here in Florida to help them understand, one, how special this place is where we live, because people already know that, right? That's why they're coming down here on a seasonal basis. And so help them remember that all of these things they love about Southwest Florida, they're gonna change, right? So if we don't change our behavior, things are gonna look here the way they look now, and we're not gonna be able to enjoy the same things that we enjoy in Southwest Florida in the face of climate change. When sea levels rise, our ecosystems will change, our shorelines will change, our ability to recreate in ways that Southwest Florida is known for, it won't be there anymore. When we think about increased extreme weather, hurricanes are going to have a significant impact on the way that we live our lives, on whether or not we can buy homes here, where we're going to need to build our homes. So all of these things will drastically change the landscape of the way we live in Southwest Florida.
Florida is a very unusual state. It's largely a coastal state. A high percentage of the population either lives right on the coast, I think around 20%, or within 10 miles of the coast. I think then you go up to maybe 50 or 60% of the total population. It's a coastal-oriented state. We have 800 miles of beaches in the state. Already over 400 of them, over half of them are eroded by state definition. And our population has grown from around 3 million at the end of World War II to 22 million today. So you put these forces together, this relentless growth in population and development, concentrated along our coastlines, which are our most vulnerable areas, and something has to give.
When you want to look locally, let's take South Florida, East or West Coast, you have to also add in the regional influences and flowing of the Florida current in the Gulf Stream and the redistribution of mass. As ice melts, water's not attracted to that big mass, so it moves away. Those add in South Florida to our sea level rise. So a 5-foot sea level rise might become an 8 or 9 foot sea level rise. There are 2-foot intervals, and you can see how quickly the Naples area, Southeast Florida, Sanibel area is inundated. Here we're only at 8 feet, and South Florida's gone. Since almost all the heat from global warming has transferred from the atmosphere to the ocean, there's really no way to just undo this, because we have to cool back down the ocean, which is already expanding through its warmth, and it is beginning to dramatically accelerate ice melt in the polar regions of Greenland and Antarctica.
A couple of the consequences of warming of the planet is an increase in sea level. Ice and glaciers melt, the volume of the oceans increases, and that causes high tides to become higher over time. The ocean has a great capacity to expand its volume and flood major portions of land. In addition, warming oceans fuel tropical storms and hurricanes. The warmer the water, the more intense the storms, the slower those storms move, so the greater impact they're likely to have on coastal communities. When you have a higher high tide because sea level has risen and you put storm surge on top of that, the capacity to flood and inundate a community becomes even greater. So it's that synergistic effect of sea level rise and storms that worries coastal communities around the planet, particularly here for us in Florida.
We should have started 40 years ago. By stopping everything now won't end the problem. We're in for it. If we don't end it, it's going to be more and more and more beyond those levels.
We can see on the landscape as we move forward into the future where storm surge on top of sea level rise is likely to occur. And the maps are showing you those kinds of scenarios. The colors represent the extent and depth of flooding as we move forward into the future. The hotter the colors, the deeper the inundation. So we've replayed Ian's track and characteristics through that model, and that model then produced some pattern of storm surge and flooding depth around the Southwest Florida landscape. And you can compare what nature dealt us against what the model hindcasted, and the match was remarkable. So this tool that we now have in our hands here in Southwest Florida can be quite valuable in predicting, again, the impact of future storms with respect to surge and flooding. One of the things we're doing at the Water School at Florida Gulf Coast University is we're literally mapping the morphology, the shape of the coast, using drone-based technology. So we're putting a drone up in the air and we're literally mapping the topography of the post-Ian world, and then we're able to compare that topography with what existed here before the storm. And when we have that before and after glimpse, we can tell managers and decision makers where their areas of greatest vulnerability sit, what kinds of regions are most likely to be impacted in the future, and then how to help manage those areas as they go through the rebuilding and restoration planning for the island. Fort Myers Beach, the city, sits on Estero Island. If you look at the Barrier Island communities and the incorporated cities that sit on those barrier islands, we have Captiva, Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, just to name three here in Southwest Florida that were seriously impacted by Hurricane Ian. All three of those barrier islands were completely overtopped and overwashed by storm surge. This entire island, just like the other barrier islands along the coast, were completely underwater. And that begs the question as to how do you actually rebuild in that sort of situation to be resilient so that you're not rebuilding this mess over and over again as you move forward in the future. And I think that it requires that decision makers, people, elected officials, local government need to think carefully about how they invest future money in rebuilding these communities and keeping them safe.
I think there's a lot to be learned from what happened with Hurricane Ian. It was the worst natural disaster that this area has ever experienced. And it's really a matter of are we willing to do the work to gather the information and to learn from it. So you want to have a resiliency plan that's fair and equitable to everybody. And we do have some neighborhoods in the city of Naples, and obviously there's plenty more in Collier County that are poor, lower income. One here in Naples is River Park, which was badly flooded by the recent Hurricane Ian. And we want to try to do everything we can to make sure those neighborhoods continue to be sustainable for the people who live here.
When asked what the top challenges are for our region, the variable precipitation and definitely the heat. It's going to get really hot here, and heat kills people.
But we need to consider that every population, every one of us living in Florida is exposed to the impacts of a changing climate, especially workers that are exposed to outdoor environments in the daily basis. That varies from construction workers to farmer workers. So everywhere in Florida, we are facing those impacts.
Myself, as a farm worker, I've seen and experienced the rise in temperature firsthand. I've been working in the fields where a fellow farm worker passes out because it's too hot. Sometimes myself, I've gotten cramps working in the field, but there's really nothing you can do about that because you don't want to go and speak out or not continue working, because if you do that, then you're not promised that the next day you're going to have a job, right? You don't want to build a reputation of being the person who can't handle this heat.
So looking at individuals that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, things like air quality, extreme heat and extreme temperatures, coastal flooding, nuisance flooding and inundation. So those groups of individuals that are working outside or individuals that are not able to access things like cooling centers or air conditioning, and those groups of people that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So as we experience greater increases in temperatures or extreme heat days, those groups of people that aren't able to be shielded from those types of things are going to feel the impacts of climate change and are feeling the impacts of climate change at a greater rate.
There are neighborhoods where it's mostly wealthy white people, and then there are neighborhoods where it's people of color who are in working class jobs. And yeah, when it comes to this place and whatever is going to happen here in terms of being in Southwest Florida and the maps we see of water rising, I mean, we see that this place is not going to be livable in not that much time. So what is the plan for all the people who cannot afford to, with their own money, move somewhere else? Are we just gonna forget them?
There will be portions of our landscape that will become uninhabitable. There'll be places on our landscape that may require communities to pack up and move and relocate.
There are things we can do about it, and all of us as individuals and companies and businesses and government, we have to get together to do what we need to do to stop as much as we can. Some is going to continue, but there are things we can do.
What we really need to do is be more responsible, be engaged, and stop consuming as much as we can, recycle not only the water, but recycle everything we have. To actually be more sustainable. You know, we have no plan B, we only have one planet. We're not gonna go to Mars anytime soon and mess up another planet.
Saving my grandchildren from a miserable life, if they could exist at all, to me is extremely worthwhile, and we have to do that.
People of my era have had a very comfortable life, and we've created a massive problem. And we should not leave it just to our kids to solve this. We should aggressively go after this right now. Changing our energy sources, planting trees, all these things that will help make a more habitable planet for ourselves and all our future generations.
To tackle climate change, what we're really going to have to do is have a paradigm shift in the way we use resources. All types of resources, from the consumer goods that we buy, purchase, and throw out, to water, to land. Ultimately, what we want to do is create a built environment that's a little bit denser. We can create really great places that are just a little more urban, a little more compact. And that will be a huge impact on our climate future.
Choosing to walk or ride a bike or use public transportation instead of a car. Limiting their air travel.
We have an active program of converting our fleet of county vehicles to electric vehicles, deploying solar on top of rooftops, floating solar arrays, capturing methane from our solid waste facilities. Everything we can do to reduce our carbon emissions.
We have many strong programs who are doing as much as they can to help the environment in terms of reducing CO2 and restoring very important ecosystems. So yes, that's a part of the solution, but it's definitely important for our governments to come together to work on agreements and whatever it is that they need to do collectively to help put in place very stringent policies so that we as an entire human nation are following those policies and being accountable.
Congress passed and the President signed the Inflation Reduction Act, and I believe that's the first piece of legislation, the first law that directly addresses mitigation by providing economic incentives for greener technology, for more efficient energy sources.
I think the key question here is when we all understand that the planet is one and we all need to act together, is when we are all going to be having to be committed, all the counties together can really work with that. It's beyond just thinking about individual boundaries. This is a global issue.
We've been involved in a couple of projects around environment the last couple of years. One of them that we're very proud to be part of is Climate Solutions, where we're in collaboration along with the Collaboratory, FGCU, the Conservancy, and Eco America. The second project that we worked on were trees. We had the Botanical Garden grow for us 3,500 trees that we handed out to anyone in the community who wanted them.
We work here at the local level with the Corps of Engineers to focus on how we can create natural infrastructure, mangroves, larger dunes along our beaches, other vegetation that can provide protection for our physical structures and our people, rather than only relying on physical infrastructure, meaning sea gates, sea walls, other floodgates, other kinds of very large and expensive kinds of investments that not only are expensive, but can be visually and aesthetically problematic, and frankly are also largely unproven in terms of their effectiveness in preventing the floods from impacting the community.
Everybody can actually do his little piece. Whether you're vegetarian, you're making a home like mine, consume less, you downscale, all of those are very, very easy tips that everybody can do.
I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s when the environmental movement was born, really, the first Earth Day, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, and so many things. It was a youth-driven movement, and there was tremendous energy and advocacy around that. Certainly we're seeing that with climate change around the world as well.
I can't imagine the worry that I would have for the next generation that I already have without my own offspring. So certainly I feel that parents are more aware of the impacts of climate change because they, have future generations to worry about. And I think as a teacher, I teach future generations, and I see a lot of those young people as extensions of the work that I'm doing.
What gives me hope is the Sunrise Movement. And the Sunrise Movement is a youth movement to fight climate change and create millions of jobs in the process. Really, it's about people under the age of 35 having a voice and having somewhere to go to learn how to stand up and make change. I'm 29, so I'm on the older side, but there are people that are in the movement that are freshmen in high school, that are 13, 14, 15 years old. Young people throughout time have been the ones who are yelling more, fighting more, willing to put their life on the line, and are ready to make change. It's nothing new that young people are the ones who are pushing for big change.
We're really lucky here in Southwest Florida. We have a group of high school students called the Youth Against Climate Change that were really inspired by the global youth movement around climate change and are doing what they can right here in Southwest Florida to inspire change in their communities.
Vote with your wallet. Support companies that have green policies.
Keep your thermostat at a moderate level.
Use public transportation or ride your bike.
Eat less beef, poultry, and dairy.
Drive an electric vehicle or hybrid.
Shop secondhand. Americans buy 68 new items of clothing each year.
Go solar if you can.
Plant trees. Reduce loans and fertilizers.
Elect green candidates. Become climate change ambassadors, like us.
you so much for offering your film. Did y'all enjoy watching it? I mean, enjoy is not the right word, I think, right? We're all like pretty disturbed by what we're witnessing. And we're gonna get a little more insight from these amazing panelists. So I wanna start, Dr. Lise Van Susteren, which you had started to speak to, is a general and forensic psychiatrist in Washington, D.C., and an expert on the physical and psychological impacts of climate change. She is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at George Washington University and has been a consultant to the executive branch of the U.S. government, profiling world leaders. She's a frequent contributor on television, radio, and in the print media. Her book, Emotional Inflammation, Discover Your Triggers and Reclaim Your Equilibrium During Anxious Times, was published in April 2020. So we have Dr. Lise Van Susteren with us soon, virtually. Chris Wilke will also be joining us virtually. He is a global climate strategist and seasoned NGO professional specializing in climate and water protection, environmental advocacy, leadership, and fundraising. With a rich background that includes recent roles as Global Advocacy Manager at Waterkeeper Alliance and Executive Director of Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, Chris brings a wealth of experience in building local, national, and international coalitions, programs, and funding to drive impactful environmental outcomes at all levels. And then finally, our third panelist is Dr. Michael Savarese, a distinguished professor of coastal geology, climate resilience, and preparation within the Department of Marine and Earth Sciences at Florida Gulf Coast University's Water School. And of course, we saw Dr. Savarese in the film. He has served as a community liaison to foster coastal resilience and climate change preparedness efforts throughout Southwest Florida and beyond, working closely with natural, urban, and cultural resource managers and elected officials within local, state, and federal government. So do we want to, let's pull up our folks so we can make sure we call out everybody. And actually, I'll hand it over to our director, Casey, to lead us through the panel.
Thank you. So we're going to start with Lise. Do we have Lise?
Tell me specifically, or I'll go off on a riff that you won't be happy about. What specific question do you want me to address right now? Is it the kids and what they're going through right now, the future, the storm today? Tell me exactly what you want to know so I don't go off on a bender.
Well, any of your benders would be illuminating, Lise. So you have kind of carte blanche. But let's just look at children. Let's look at what children, how it's going to damage children going forward the next decade.
It is extremely damaging, and probably the easiest way to summarize this is for people to recognize that there is something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and we know that extreme weather events qualify as adverse childhood experiences, and we also know that the more traumas affect children, the more likely they are to suffer from adverse childhood experiences, and studies show that they are more likely to die young and to suffer from chronic illness as a result of ACEs. So we have a threat that not only exists today, but one that extends into the future. And in addition, there are two other things that I'd like to point out. One is the enormous impact of fearing the future when you are a young person and you have many more years to live. I dubbed it pre-traumatic stress. I thought I coined it, but turns out the Danish army did. But there's pre-traumatic stress where all of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are experienced, but before some of these events even happen. And then the second thing is, I've done surveys now, initially a global survey of 10,000 young people. Now coming out mid-October from the Lancet is a study of 16,000 people. And in general, what we know, not specifically addressing these, the second study, but the first one, and what I know of the way the mind works, is that our children are increasingly, in the first study, that by a factor, it was like 2/3 of the kids lay the blame of climate change firmly at the feet of government. And so when trust in government is eroded, that is when our form of government is under threat. And we need to remember remember that democracy is not a default form of government. It requires an involved citizenry. So that's my first short riff. You told me to say what was on my mind.
Thank you, Lise. We're going to open it up to questions in a minute, and that's really helpful. So our next panelist is Chris Wilke, and Chris is one of the most strategic climate change activists that I know and informed, and he did yeoman work keeping oil and gas drilling off the coast of the Bahamas. And he's been working, I pitched in a little bit on trying to keep oil and gas drilling from Senegal, from the coast of Senegal. And Chris was 5 years, longer than that, the Global Advocacy Manager for the Waterkeeper Alliance. I was in the Waterkeeper Alliance for 5 years as well, so we were colleagues. All these people are not only colleagues, they're friends. So Chris, weigh in on what you think are the top line objectives or concerns as you see it on the war against climate change.
Well, thank you, Casey. It's so great to be here with you and all the other panelists, and congrats on your film. And it's, seeing the impacts of the hurricane just in the last 24 hours, it just reminds us of everything that's at stake. I guess the 3 points that I kind of wanted to cover as I was thinking about this panel today. The first one, the foremost one, just get it out of the way right away, is we have to keep working on stopping the sources of climate change, even as we adapt, even as we struggle with the impacts. There is no point at which we just pivot to focusing on impacts and forget preventing it, because it will keep getting worse. That is a universal aphorism, I believe, is stuff can always get worse than it is. And the key point that we have to remember, there are many sources of climate change, there are many things that we can do that will minimize the impact on the planet, but fossil fuel extraction and the use of fossil fuels must decrease deeply, dramatically, and over a sustained period of time until we can come into the planetary balance, which is often referred to as net zero. The second point I want to make is that it gets to Lisa's point. The situation is very serious. It's terrifying, and it's traumatic to both experience the impacts of climate change and to think about what it means for the entire planet. But it actually could be worse. There's a lot of talk about triggering events for runaway climate change, and it's going to come out of our hands. There's a healthy debate going on about those subjects, but where I'm kind of coming in, I'm not a scientist, but the ones I'm following and paying attention to, it doesn't look like we are going to get to that point where we just lose control of this and it just runs away, at least not within the next several hundred years. And that's actually good news. It is, but the truth is bad enough. It can get worse. It can get a lot worse. We can trigger feedback loops and tipping points and things like that. So it can continue to get worse, but we never really lose our agency in being able to stop it, or at least mitigate it. And then the third point I wanted to make, just watching the politics, news, and everything, is that the pathway to coming into the planetary boundaries, to achieving net zero, where the Earth is absorbing as much carbon as it is emitting, including our own emissions, is very, very difficult. It involves a huge amount of systemic change. And one of the problems with that is there are forces that are actually working against us right now, that are putting out disinformation, that are actually undermining policies, that are putting democracy on the line in order to limit their any controls on the way they make money, which is by selling fossil fuels. And that's a real problem. And I don't know if we can solve this problem over the objections of so many people and over the rampant disinformation that we're facing. So that needs to be brought in line. And that needs to be given the light of day and shown in public for what it is, that it is actually a very cynical disinformation campaign, lies, if you will, to sow doubt and confuse people.
So, I mean, that's a huge problem. In fact, in my former home state of Florida, Governor DeSantis has excised any mention of climate change from all of the state records, so there's no mention of climate change, much the way Rick Scott did in the prior administration. And that's just not helpful. You know, that's burying your head in quicksand. And so we're up against that, in addition to, you know, to the real problems we're trying to tackle and trying to bring this in line. So speaking of the front lines, Dr. Savarese, who you just saw in the movie, is with us today. I wasn't sure he'd be able to make it because he's based in Fort Myers, and luckily he didn't get too swamped. So Mike, tell us what's going on, what you just saw happen, and what do you think the future of regions like Southwest Florida are? What's the prognosis for Southwest Florida?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Casey, and thanks everybody there at Project Winterland. It's good to be part of this conversation. Frankly, I wish I were with you and I were in Montana at this very moment. It's been a very PTSD kind of last few days since we just experienced Helene. Anyway, so Casey, you ask you know, a really critical question that I think about literally every day, and that is just how sustainable is this situation? You know, the prognosis, I would argue, is not very good. I guess what I'm focusing on here on the front lines here on the Gulf Coast of Florida is the one specific effect of climate change, and that is an increase in storminess. And when you increase storminess on top of sea level rise, you have this, you know, more evil synergistic effect. Ian, I think what we've learned, and I guess this isn't new knowledge for a geoscientist that's interested in the coast, but once a coastline has been impacted and compromised in terms of its resiliency capacity, it's then left ever so more vulnerable as you move forward into the future. And Ian was one of those vulnerability makers, if you will. We took such serious damage during Ian that we were left, metaphorically speaking, with our pants down. And you know, we don't have the kind of natural protective features that we had before Ian. And that sort of triggering impactful event isn't unique to Southwest Florida. It has happened along all of Florida's coast, particularly on the Gulf Coast. And when you've got an extreme storm, I would call Helene an extreme storm to impact the Big Bend area. That's where it made landfall last night. That area had been made more vulnerable by other previous extreme storms like Hurricane Michael in years past. And the coast just doesn't have time to repair itself naturally, and it becomes too costly to repair itself artifactually through human intervention. And so if you look at us here after Ian in September of 2022, almost 2 years to the day, I guess tomorrow is the 2-year anniversary. Since Ian, we've had 3 storms that have caused severe inundation and overwash from storm surge. It was Hurricane Idalia in the fall of 23, Hurricane Debbie, which was at least here, and Idalia here were trivial storms. Debbie was in July of this year. And then of course Helene, which was just yesterday. And so to have to deal with, or to use Chris's thought, adapting to these kinds of more frequent iterative phenomena is just not sustainable. And not only are we feeling it with respect to damage and loss of life and people leaving the area, the economic impacts are extreme. The impacts on the mortgage market, on homeowners insurance, they're all going to worsen and worsen. So, and then of course, to tie into Liza's comments, I mean, people are stressed and anxious, and you know, it's not a happy time. So,
yeah.
I'm not sure there was an answer in there for you, Casey. Hopefully there was.
No, that was very informative, Mike, absolutely. So I don't know if anybody has a question. So we kind of covered really very briefly wellness and psychiatric implications of climate change, which is something that you don't normally, or like might not be your first thought about this, but it really needs to be taken into consideration. We talked about some strategic changes that we need to make, and obviously toning down, pulling back on oil and gas excavation. And then we talked about Mike on the front lines and what's going on in Southwest Florida. Does anybody have a question for any of our panelists? Yes, sir. Yeah, Rob.
What is the reduction in population in the Gulf Coast area?
What is the what?
Reduction in population based on this.
The reduction?
Yeah, you mentioned it. I wonder if there's stats on population.
Well, Mike may have some knowledge on that, but the population in Florida is not reducing. I mean, it may start to turn because people will realize that some of these areas are just not sustainable. But for the moment, we're still growing by leaps and bounds. Mike, do you have any 411 on that?
Yeah, Casey, it might be helpful for you to repeat the question when it's
yes, sure.
It's hard for us to hear, but I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah, so Rob is asking if there's a reduction in population, I guess, caused by climate change in Florida.
I don't have any hard facts and figures for you, but population is definitely still growing here. There's still lots of people coming in. I think maybe what's more interesting is sort of a redistribution of the population. In other words, people are leaving and other people are taking their place. We're also seeing this seemingly strange economic transition. Fort Myers Beach, a township which sits on a barrier island, after Ian, it had a lot of generational homes where people had been living there in cheaper, less resilient construction, if you will, and those people lost their homes, were unable to rebuild, and those properties have all been sold, and many of them are being purchased by Airbnb corporations. So the nature of our communities, the demographics of our communities are changing as a consequence. And just as an interesting sideline, Fort Myers Beach now is worried about not having enough kids to populate their elementary school because the population has shifted so much. So I think somebody else had some thoughts about population change.
Somebody, Chris or Lise?
Thank you. I did. I had one thought. Thank you. That's very helpful, Mike. And I would like to say that also I forgot my manners in thanking people for having me here as a climate activist. I tend to be jumping right in with both feet instead of saying thank you for all the work you've done here. And I love your motto, ideas are good, solutions are better. I took a picture of it. As far as the population is concerned, this was of great interest to me from a psychological perspective, and that is that Florida is still growing in population, as you said, Michael. But what I believe is happening is that people who recently moved there, thinking of this as the idyllic place to retire, have recognized the depth of the problems and that they are vulnerable. And I believe those are many of the people, the population at least, that is leaving.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the
There's
change.
definitely
Go ahead.
There's definitely a lack of appreciation of the sensitive place for someone who retires in Florida. You know, if you're retiring, Interstate 75 drives the current of retirement on the west coast of Florida, and I-95 drives what happens up the east coast. And the people that are driving down I-75 to move to Florida are just unaware of what hurricanes are all about. And so they come here kind of blind. And so you're right, I think there's just it's a quick learning curve, and you don't really learn until you get here.
Yeah, I mean, I sold my house about 1.5 years ago in Florida, and partly because I've been doing the research. I just knew that the housing market would crest one day, and basically driven by excessive mortgage, excessive insurance rates, and the market will drive the kind of redistribution of population, and people get the idea. And people, I knew after Ian, and my house went through Ian. I suffered all right. It wasn't horrific, but I knew that I predicted there'd be another storm of that magnitude within 5 years. It ended up being within 2 years, and this is just going to continue. This is the track we're on. So, it will drive changes in population, changes in where we, and one thing point I want to make is that environmental justice, and we touched on this a little bit in the documentary about how people who are disadvantaged are going to be less prepared to make changes or to adapt. And the other thing is, in our rush to renewable energies, we have to be very conscious of not raping native lands in our lithium mining. This is another invasion of native lands to take, because we need lithium like crazy. So we have to go fast, but we have to go fast responsibly. And we have to check ourselves at every point and make sure that we're not taking advantage of less advantaged people, or we're just, in our rush to seek answers, which we need to do. We don't have a whole lot of time. So, but let's do it in a responsible fashion. So, wondering if there are any other questions from the group here? Yes, sir.
Casey, what we're listening to is Plan A. We got to mitigate climate issues, less use of fuels and things like that. You climate activists, us climate activists talk about this stuff, but it's all Plan A. It's clear Plan A ain't working. What's Plan B, and what does that look like?
So Tim is asking, the climate activists are working on Plan A, which is basically kind of addressing the problem. He's asking what Plan B is. What do you mean by Plan B, Tim?
I don't see a Plan B. And if we've got crisis situation around the world, we've got climate activists and academics drawing attention to this, and nothing's happening, what do the smart people think is going to be a consequence of no action?
Well, it's not like there's no action. I mean, it's a bell curve, and we need to get people. Right now, we're just slowly kind of ramping up to some new solutions, and that's going to be basically driven by the technology sector. They're going to come up with some innovative ideas to try to overtake the rate at which we're kind of collapsing. So there may be some innovative solutions that we haven't seen yet, and so everybody has to be involved. I don't know that there's no Plan B. I mean, there's people working in all kinds of sectors. There's people working in green technologies and green, innovative solutions. I know I live in Oklahoma now, and you can't say climate change in Oklahoma, but you can say sustainable and renewable, and that's okay. That's permitted. That's like parlance that is not driven off the playing field. So there's a lot of wind energy in Oklahoma. There's a lot of solar energy coming about. So we need kind of an all hands on deck effort, and it goes from us, what we can do in our daily lives, to voting in the right people who are going to be sensitive to this and kind of handle this responsibly, and then to federal governments and international governments. But I don't think it's quite fair to say there's nothing happening. I don't know. Do you have opinions about that, Chris or Mike or Lise?
Sure. As I kind of said earlier, I'll just say it again. Plan A never goes away. Plan A is the math that we are dealt with. And that is the central task to prevent things from getting worse, is to reduce carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases to the point where the Earth can absorb them at the same rate that we're putting them out. And that never goes away. We are now, if you consider Plan B to be adapting and disaster relief and loss of damage and all these other things in response to the impacts of climate change, we've now added Plan B, C, and D to Plan A, but Plan A has not gone away. It will stay there, and it will keep getting worse until we deal with Plan A. And so that is just as a fundamental fact that we have to deal with. I also think that the phrase, the use of fossil fuels and alternative energies and things like that, we need to really put this in perspective. If we are extracting fossil fuels at the same rate that we are today, it does not matter how much renewable energy we have. Just think about that for a second. If someone buys a new Tesla, or some government puts up a new wind farm, and fossil fuel extraction remains where it is, That carbon is coming out of the earth and into the atmosphere in one form or another. Maybe in plastic production, maybe in, even if the United States is actually lowering its carbon emissions. I don't know if everyone knows that, but we are actually going down a little bit. But last year we had our record year for fossil fuel exports. It's like sending your drug dealers to rehab to get clean so they can sell more drugs. That's what's happening. And also, we are trying to summit a mountain soon. And one of these years, we're going to reach peak oil production, which is at the point where the most amount of oil in history is being produced, and we're going to start declining. That will be a point for a minor celebration. This is like taking a snapshot on the photo on the summit of a mountain. You still have half the journey left, and that's climbing down the mountain, and the metaphor applies, I think, because many mountain climbers will tell you that's the most dangerous part of the journey, is climbing down the mountain. The day that we reach peak oil, we are at maximum CO2 emissions, more than we've ever emitted. We are doing more damage to the planet on the day we reach peak emissions, and we have all of the reduction still ahead of us. So we've got to keep oil in the ground, we've got to keep coal in the ground, we've got to keep methane gas, sometimes called natural gas, in the ground. And we need to accelerate the transition, yes, but we also need to reduce by about 5% a year globally is a number that we need to do to keep things from getting completely out of hand. Sorry if I went too long.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. So I think we're going to get into the next element of the program today, so we kind of ran a little over. We got started a few minutes late. So I want to thank Dr. Lise Van Susteren. I want to thank Dr. Michael Savarese, and want to thank Chris Wilke for their participation today. Chris phoning in from Seattle, Lise from Washington, D.C., and Mike Savarese from Fort Myers, Florida. So thank you all for your interest, and we can continue to sprinkle the infield with more information about this. Thank you very much.